But Antarctica, to me, is a very awe-inspiring place, and I think that that one of the most striking things about Antarctica to me is the moments of silence one has here within a beautiful environment. Because when the wind doesn't blow, when it doesn't blow, which sometimes is rare, there is hardly a sound to be heard in Antarctica because there's no running water. There are no people nearby. There are no machines. There's no noise. There's not even any rustling of leaves or movement of animals at all. It's just a completely dead silence which I've experienced nowhere else except on this continent.
Just a completely dead silence. This continent, Antarctica, it's been called many different things. The white continent, the frozen continent, a laboratory for science. Fly in the still, quiet air above the mountains and the ice and snow. Then the adjectives come easily. Vast and spectacular, breathtaking and beautiful. And it's all these things. It is a continent, so it is vast and crowded, beautiful and sometimes ugly. White and frozen and silent. Antarctica is many different things, and what it is depends on who's looking, where they are. McMurdo Station, for example, it's the main staging base for the United States science effort, busy with scientists, engineers, support people. Draw a parallel with a western frontier town, and you wouldn't be too far wrong. Away from the town and the noise, it's different. Only 60 miles away, there's a lonely outpost for science. A team from Virginia Polytechnic Institute is here, at a place called Lake Bonny, frozen over much of the time. They're looking into the ecology of the lake. And because of their work, Lake Bonny can serve as a model for studying lakes all over the world. They measure water levels and have found out that the lake has doubled in size since it was discovered and described back in 1903, and it's still growing. The lake is fed by glaciers, which spill down into the valley and then melt. It's also fed by subterranean springs. The VPI team samples the meltwater and the lake itself at all levels down under the ice. Even the muck of the bottom, where they've found bacteria and fungi and algae. Even a multicellular animal, all surviving under the ice in a very simple ecosystem. Preliminary work is done in the lab. More detailed studies back at McMurdo and later in the States. Graduate and undergraduate assistants have been part of this project, more than 40 so far out in the field. The results of these studies have been analyzed and translated into computer language. Now there's a successful mathematical model of the lake. How does a lake change? Why? The answers from Lake Bonny can help us understand other lakes in other parts of the world. Research in the Antarctic is not exactly lonely. Consider the work of this man, Dr. Art de Vries of the University of Illinois. He's going fishing for science. Problem is, the fish are down under the annual ice near McMurdo, maybe 12 feet thick. So he has to call on a drill team for help. The fish is very special. The Disosticus mawsoni. It's a sort of Antarctic cod. De Vries has caught about 1,500, and his studies have yielded important results for the whole field of cryobiology. The fish survive in icy waters because they produce a kind of antifreeze. The De Vries team, husband and wife Yuan, have identified the compound, a glycoprotein, and studied it. They take blood samples, isolate the antifreeze, and then re-inject it, metabolic process. Even here in the lab, support, equipment, is vital. The substance is marked and then tracked with a radioisotope counter. The results can serve as tools for studies into human medicine. If a fish can stand extreme cold without damage, then why not human organs and tissues, whole blood? And perhaps even crops can be inoculated against the damage of killer frosts. De Vries is now studying other species, down here and elsewhere, adding to the store of knowledge of how organisms have adapted to an extreme environment. Antarctica sits there, at the bottom of the world, a giant laboratory for science. It's a place of many parts, each different from the other. This is an area called the Dry Valleys in Victoria Land. Dry because it rarely snows here. The glaciers spill over the mountains, through the passes, and then stop. It's a stark and forbidding place. And yet, there is life here. Among the rocks, scientists have found algae, bacteria, and fungi buried within the rocks for the past 200,000 years. We now know that life extends to the coldest, driest climate on Earth. These discoveries have caused others to reconsider the idea of life on Mars, perhaps buried within the rocks there. The dry valleys are important because they're exposed. Only about 2% of the continent is exposed like this. Geologists need only to reach down and bring up samples from the past. Major investigations, here and around McMurdo Sound, a complex operation of drilling and analysis. The drill crews are from New Zealand. The project is managed by Americans. Much of the lab work and equipment, Japanese. They've drilled at 15 different sites, reaching down as deep as 1,000 feet for core samples. Dr. Sam Trevis, University of Nebraska.
The cores are taken from the hole and boxed and brought to the laboratory, and we do a preliminary evaluation of the cores here to enhance their quality and to signal the importance or unimportance of the core to other investigators who want to look at them. What we do is here is basically look at them, describe their characteristics, and give them a rock name. Then as part of our initial monitoring, we cut the rocks into thin slices and use a thin sectioning machine to make thin sections. And we look at those thin sections with a polarizing microscope and describe the minerals and the mineralogy of the rocks, and that enables us to identify them more. Our ability to cut thin sections, most geologists can do it, but some geologists are a lot better than others, and we have the best thin section maker in Japan with us here on Ross Island this field season, and his name is Mr. Ono. Mr. Ono turns out marvelous thin sections much more quickly than we can, and much more beautiful than we can.
Close-up look Earth, 10, 20 million years ago. Antarctica and the rest of the Earth. At first, the connection seems remote, but move back in time, more than 40 million years, and you find the connections. There is strong evidence that this land was once joined with other continents, South America and Africa, Australia and New Zealand, a supercontinent. Then come the questions. If there is copper in South America and coal in Africa, then why not here, in this place? The presence of copper has been verified, and coal too. Along the continental shelves, there may be oil and gas. The resources probably are here. Getting them out is another matter. Logistics and cost and international understandings. Science teams have gone high up onto the nunataks, making the connection between past and present, between this place and the rest of the world. They've found fossils of ferns and reptiles, evidence of those days when it was part of a larger continent. Still, it's part of our world, and whatever happens, Antarctica will be a part of it, part of the solution, part of the problem. Think a moment about the climate of the world. A flight from McMurdo to the South Pole follows the path of the Beardmore Glacier, part of the West Antarctic ice sheet. This continent holds 90% of the world's ice, advancing, retreating. The pattern affects world weather. The ice itself also provides important clues. Scientists take cores and read surface temperatures going back as much as 100,000 years. The data are being used to verify models of our global climate.
Pull this motor along a while, guys, here. Make the decision on what to
do. Is the Earth heating up, or is it cooling off? The answer might first come from Antarctica. The South Pole, sitting in the middle of a huge ice sheet, more than a mile thick, larger than the United States. They've built a science station here, a small village tucked away under a huge dome. Nearby, the symbolic South Pole, flanked by the flags of 19 nations which have agreed to use Antarctica for peace and for science. The cleanest spot on Earth. Scientists measure what's in the air and compare with readings elsewhere. The differences tell a story of global weather and global pollution, fluorocarbons, hydrocarbons. With this data, they can set benchmarks. At the South Pole, they get readouts from polar orbiting satellites, precise measurements on their location on the planet. There's a vast array of complex instruments sitting under the dome, all contributing to a better understanding of what is happening here. They check and count the streams of particles coming at us from space, important information to be correlated with other studies of cosmic ray activities. The scientists do go outside, far enough to take samples and readings not contaminated by the village. Dr. Michael Kuhn, an exchange scientist from the University of Innsbruck, with an array of very simple instruments, out here, all alone, he's looking into the energy balance of the entire Earth. The South Pole is a heat sink. From here, heat escapes from the Earth. So here is where Dr. Kuhn is.
Yeah, the heat budget of the Antarctic is a very important factor in the general weather machine. You could say that what we experience in mid-latitudes as weather is just the process of transferring energy from the tropics where energy is received to the poles where energy is lost. And this drives our weather.
Being alone out here in the cold is not all bad. It does have its advantages.
In the meantime, it has become an old habit for me to work on snow and ice, and I really like the surrounding, and I like the working conditions. It's like in a monastery. You don't have any distraction, but you just work and enjoy the scenery.
Seipel Station. There's not much scenery to enjoy here. Seipel is one of 4 stations that's manned year-round. It's buried beneath the snow. Only ventilating shafts stick up above the surface. And the front door? It's a hole in the roof. At this desolate spot, they study the ionosphere, a region in which trapped particles are converted into energy, energy which comes at us as heat, or light, or radiation. It affects our communications, maybe even our weather. So, here at Seipel, they listen to the skies. What they hear are whistlers. There's a conjugate station at Roberval in Canada. When lightning strikes there, they hear whistlers here. What they hear tells them a lot about what's going on in the ionosphere and the magnetosphere. They not only listen, they transmit very low-frequency waves through an antenna that's 13 miles long, one of a kind in the world. At this desolate spot, science is measuring the disturbances, the changes in our skies. Then there's the peninsula, a very different part of this continent. Spectacular fjords and mountains forming a crooked finger which points north to South America. The peninsula is the maritime region, long stretches of open water, higher temperatures, a place for fertile research. Some of it is done aboard the Hero, a specially equipped research vessel, and at Palmer Station. Together, the two form a research system for studying this region. The waters are incredibly rich in nutrients, a sort of plankton soup for fish and penguins, seals and whales. And at the water's edge, there's also life, rich, abundant. Biologists come to this place to observe, to study. The life forms are easy to get at. Consider the penguin. For many people, the penguin is the symbol of Antarctica. To the scientists, it offers glimpses into a fairly complex social system somewhere in the middle of the Antarctic food chain. The life of the penguin is governed by well-developed patterns of behavior, mating, nesting, caring for the young, even greeting each other in a ceremony of recognition. Two men from the University of Minnesota are studying these patterns, Robert Hoffman and Dick Reitley. They attach a simple radio transmitter to selected birds with great gentleness.
Yes, sure. Things aren't that bad, are they? Yeah.
They're checking into how the penguins eat and act, live and die, and where they do these things. Daily routines, migration patterns. Even outfitted with 20th century technology, wired for sound, the penguin is recognized and welcomed back. Patterns and population studies. Impressed by none of this, the penguin soon forgets the intrusion and goes about its life. And that's what makes it valuable for study. The biologist looks at life and describes it. But others, some others, look to the life forms of Antarctica as a rich resource. The seal, once a commodity in world markets. The day may come when it's hunted again. Here at a place called Hutton Cliffs, near McMurdo, another team from the University of Minnesota keeps track of a group of Waddell seals, tagging them for later identification. They're after patterns too, migration and behavior. One estimate says there are 500,000 Waddell seals in Antarctica, and maybe 50 million of other species. Learning more about them can help establish guidelines, quotas for harvesting. Above the ice, the seal is awkward and clumsy, but underneath, it performs graceful dives, as deep as half a mile, for as long as 45 minutes. With special underwater television equipment, the team watches and listens, gathering information that will provide a pattern for intelligent conservation. Our interest in this place has grown over the years. First, the time of discovery, then the heroic age of exploration, Wilkes and Bellingshausen, Shackleton, Amundsen and Scott, and Byrd. Then came the others, scientists and engineers, mechanics and construction workers and administrators. They came knowing that this place is important zone and for what it means to the rest of the world. They're looking at Antarctica, soaring up into its skies, drilling into the land, and watching its life, its patterns and rhythms. They return to the universities, the laboratories with information and data, and an understanding that our world of pollution and dwindling resources and climate changes cannot ignore this place. It is, after all, 1/10 of the land mass of our planet. Data and information and understanding. And something else. Sir Douglas Mawson, one of the early explorers. We came to probe the mystery, to reduce this land to terms of science. But there is always the indefinable which holds aloof, yet which rivets our souls. Antarctica, this continent, silent and noisy, and frozen, and waiting.
Not running very smoothly yet. 8 seconds.